Regional leaders meet in Thailand for APEC summit. John Lee meets presidents of Indonesia and Singapore. President Xi Jinping holds talks with Asian leaders ahead of summit. Hello and welcome to TVB News. Leaders of the 21-member Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum began their annual summit meeting in Bangkok today. It is the first in-person meeting of the APEC leaders since 2018 and comes with the world facing multiple challenges, including rising inflation, the ongoing war in Ukraine, climate change, and the pandemic. Addressing the leaders' meeting, President Xi Jinping stressed the need for greater cooperation in the Asia-Pacific. Daniel Rell tells us more.
The APEC meeting, which is hosted by Thailand, comes on the heels of summits of the Group of 20 Major Economies on the Indonesian island of Bali and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in Cambodia. Among those in attendance are President Xi Jinping, US Vice President Kamala Harris, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. In his opening remarks, Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha said the region is still reeling from the impact of the pandemic and that the situation has become even worse because of climate change. He said we need to help each other to alleviate this and protect our world. We cannot live our lives in the old way. Addressing the leaders' meeting, President Xi Jinping urged countries to uphold international fairness and justice and build an Asia-Pacific of peace and stability. Xi said the rapid growth of the region over the past decades attests to the critical importance of mutual respect, solidarity and cooperation. Established to promote economic integration, APEC groups 21 economies that account for 38% of the global population and 62% of the world's gross domestic product. The war in Ukraine, great power rivalries, inflation, climate change and the pandemic are among the issues to be tackled in the two-day summit. Leaders from the 21-member forum are formally meeting in closed-door sessions today and on Saturday. For some, it will be at least the third such opportunity for face-to-face talks in the past 2 weeks. Daniel Roll, TVB News.
It's day 2 of Chief Executive John Lee's visit to Thailand for the APEC forum held in Bangkok. Today, the CE met regional leaders, including Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Indonesian President Joko Widodo. Jackie Lin reports.
This morning, Chief Executive John Lee was the earliest to arrive at the venue for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit among the 21 regional leaders. He met with Thailand's Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. The first meeting revolves around issues such as sustainable development. John Lee was seated next to President Xi Jinping. In Lee's attendance for the next session on the promotion of trade, there were more exchanges when the city leader met with Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Another highlight of the day, a bilateral meeting with Indonesian President Joko Widodo. Lee thanked the president for supporting the SAR's bid to join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, a free trade agreement among a dozen Asia-Pacific countries.
The relationship between Indonesia and Hong Kong, particularly in the ASEAN community, is strong. And I also thank you, Mr. President, for supporting us in our application to join ASEAN. Hong Kong has a lot to contribute to the overall success of ASEAN.
I'm very confident that the cooperation between Indonesia and Hong Kong will further flourish under your leadership.
Another sit-down was arranged between Lee and Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. Also in attendance were Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development Algernon Yao and Director of the Chief Executive's Office Carol Ip.
My office life is very busy, as you know very well. In your job, 24 hours is always not enough.
John Lee will have one more bilateral meeting slated for Saturday before the summit wraps up around noon. Authorities have yet to unveil which regional leader has been invited. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
During his visit to the APEC forum, President Xi Jinping met on the sidelines separately with the leaders of the Philippines, Singapore, and Japan. Xi said he wished to increase developmental and strategic ties with China's neighbors in the Asia-Pacific region. Timothy Lee reports.
President Xi Jinping took the opportunity at the APEC summit to hold talks with other regional leaders. In a meeting with Filipino President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., President Xi stressed Beijing's high regard for strategic ties with Manila. Xi said China and the Philippines' cooperation through the Belt and Road Initiative can greatly benefit the building of the latter's infrastructure, adding that the friendship between the two countries is ready for a new chapter. Regarding territorial disputes between the two nations in the South China Sea, Xi noted the two countries should solve the conflict peacefully and ensure stability in the region. The Filipino president responded by saying that his country aims for regional stability and will continue to support the One China policy. In a meeting with Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, President Xi emphasized how Beijing's relationship with the city-state is exemplary for much of the Southeast Asian region. He added that China is willing to work with Singapore to continue mutual development and to provide security for Southeast Asia. Lee hailed the mainland's rapid economic growth and that Singapore looks forward to deeper ties with a strong and powerful nation like China. President Xi also met with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on Thursday night, marking the first face-to-face meeting between the leaders of China and Japan in 3 years. The Chinese president remarked that this year commemorates the 50th anniversary of the normalization of Beijing-Tokyo ties, with both sides agreeing to increase direct communications between the two nations' military and economic leaders. The Japanese Prime Minister expressed his concern about Beijing's territorial claims to the Diaoyu Islands, and also urged China to use its status as a United Nations Security Council member to ease tensions in the Korean Peninsula. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Thai police have fired rubber bullets to disperse a protest against the APEC summit in Bangkok. About 350 protesters had gathered and clashed with police some 10 kilometers from the venue. Video on social media showed officers in riot gear firing rubber bullets towards protesters amid scuffling. Demonstrators were seen throwing projectiles, charging at police, and trying to overturn a police car. Police advanced on them with shields, beating them back with batons. An activist said people were protesting against the summit and Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. And back to the city, Hong Kong's daily COVID tally surpassed the 8,000 mark for the second consecutive day. 7,501 infections were locally acquired. The city logged 8,008 new cases today, slightly fewer than yesterday. 14 care homes for the elderly and the disabled reported a total of 21 infections among residents and staff. 6 more BQ 1.1 subvariants were found in locally acquired cases. 8 more patients died, bringing the death toll in the current pandemic wave to 10,364. The government has authorized the use of BioNTech's bivalent vaccine, which targets the Omicron variant, for emergency use today. Some pharmacists have suggested that residents should take the newly available bivalent vaccine for their 4th jab, as it can create 4 times more antibodies than its predecessor. Some studies from the U.S. have shown that those aged 55 or above can increase antibodies by 13 times if they receive the bivalent vaccine for their 4th dose. The new batch of vaccines will arrive to the city by late November at the earliest. Coming up after the break, first Hong Kong package tour for Taiwan in over 2 years. Nancy Pelosi steps down from White House leader position. Britain announces budget for challenging days ahead. Welcome back. Taiwan finally reopened to Hong Kong tourists, but only those participating in tour groups. To meet anticipated demand, a Taiwan airline is set to gradually increase the frequency of daily flights between Hong Kong and Taiwan to pre-pandemic levels. Jackie Lin reports.
These Hong Kongers are the lucky few to be the first tourists to fly into Taiwan from Hong Kong for their 5-day tour in Taipei and Yilan. Taiwan reopened to Hong Kong travelers last Monday after the inbound travel restrictions were in place for more than 2 years. Today's flight marked the first organized tour heading to the island. Even though Hong Kongers have to travel in groups and follow local pandemic restrictions, some couldn't contain their excitement for this long-awaited trip.
Few years not the trouble, so I'm very happy to go. Because Hong Kong a few years have something wrong, so I go to travel, maybe to take it to find my first friends.
好想去咯。
This woman said she really wants to go to Taiwan to meet up with her friends, whom she has not seen for 3 years. She wants to travel independently, but she only has a group option for now. Meanwhile, Hong Kong travelers can also benefit from the relaxed border restrictions when they return home. Starting next Monday, inbound travelers only need to take PCR tests on the first and third days upon their arrival in Hong Kong.
那11月呢，我们现在是每
General Manager of EVA Air Chen Shui-feng says, in November, the airline only had 1 flight a day between Hong Kong and Taiwan. Starting this December, EVA Air will arrange 3 daily flights. Both Taiwan and Hong Kong require no mandatory hotel quarantine, with a period of self-monitoring of health for 7 days and 3 days, respectively. Chan believes that will help increase the airline's passenger loads significantly. As to when Taiwan will allow Hong Kong and Macau residents to fly into the island without participating in package tours, Taiwan authorities said they will review the situation and adjust the inbound travel restrictions in phases. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Veteran journalist Bao Choi has been given the green light to appeal her case for making false statements to the top court. Earlier this month, the Court of Appeal upheld the former RTHK producer's conviction. She was found guilty at a lower court and fined $6,000 for deceiving the government twice to access car ownership records for an RTHK documentary on the 2019 Yuen Long mob attack. Today, Judge Alex Lee granted Choi to appeal the case at the Court of Final Appeal. Lee said the defense brought up a point of law that is reasonably arguable and of great and general importance. Outside the court, Choi said whether she would eventually win or lose, what matters is that she has persevered in her pursuit of justice. In the Netherlands, Dutch judges convicted 3 men to life in prison for their role in the 2014 downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. The plane was shot down over Ukraine. Families of the victims expressed relief after the judgment was passed.
I feel relieved. I feel like the process has come to an end, and it's been very fair, and it's been meticulous, and it's been thorough, and the evidence has been weighed, and I feel like for those who want to hear, the truth is out there.
The 3 men convicted were former Russian intelligence agents and a Ukrainian separatist leader. A 4th Russian was acquitted of all charges. The men are believed to be in Russia, which will not extradite them. Moscow denies any involvement of responsibility for MH17's downing, and in 2014, it also denied any presence in Ukraine. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced she will not seek a leadership position in the new Congress, ending a historic run as the first woman with the gavel. She's making way for a new generation to steer the party after Democrats lost control of the House to Republicans in the midterm elections. This report from NBC News.
Tonight, after losing her speaker's job following Republican wins in the House, Nancy Pelosi announcing the end of an era.
When I first came to the floor at 6 years old, never would I have thought that someday I would go from homemaker to House Speaker.
For the first time in 2 decades, she will not lead the Democratic Party in the House.
I will not seek re-election to Democratic leadership in the next Congress. For me, the hours come for a new generation to lead the Democratic caucus that I so deeply respect.
It's a historic moment. Pelosi is the first and only woman to serve as House Speaker. Today, praising 3 of the 4 presidents she worked with. No mention of former President Trump, who she once stood behind tearing up a copy of the State of the Union. Her move comes just weeks after her husband Paul was assaulted inside their San Francisco home. Today, Pelosi getting emotional, speaking about him.
For my dear husband Paul, who has been my beloved partner in life and my pillar of support, thank you.
Pelosi has been a lightning rod for Republicans for decades.
One-party Democrat rule in Washington is finished. We have fired Nancy Pelosi.
The GOP now facing the challenging job of governing with a slim majority, something Pelosi excelled at for years.
It's been my privilege to play a part in forging extraordinary progress for the American people.
The question now for Democrats is who comes next, and the favorite appears to be Hakeem Jeffries, a congressman from New York. If he's successful, he'd be the first black leader of either party in both the Senate and the House.
In Britain, Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt announced his budget with a string of tax increases and tighter public spending. As inflation rockets and recession looms in the UK, Hunt says the measures are necessary. This after the blow dealt to the country's fiscal reputation by former Prime Minister Liz Truss. Tracy Furness has more.
Outlining the plan to fix the public finances, almost half through tax rises, Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer said the economy was already in recession and set to shrink next year as it struggles with inflation forecasts to average 9.1% this year and 7.4% in 2023.
We have a recession, and what I want to do is to make sure that this recession is shallower and hurts people less. So we have been careful in a very balanced approach to make sure that we're not making that situation worse. Living standards are going down. That is the uncomfortable situation facing us.
Hunt announced a £55 billion package of tax increases and spending cuts in his emergency budget Thursday. It includes higher taxes for higher earners, a higher windfall tax on the profits of energy companies, and changes to spending on healthcare.
I will increase the NHS budget in each of the next 2 years by £3.3 billion. The Chief Executive of the NHS, Amanda Pritchard, has said that this should provide sufficient funding for the NHS to fulfil its key priorities.
Some analysts said, while former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng had spooked markets with his wide-ranging tax cuts and borrowing, Hunt had gone too far in the other direction.
The markets would look at a UK government that is looking to slow the economy to a crawl over the next 2 to 3 years. The reaction to the Kwarteng budget wasn't for full-blown austerity. And I think in trying to restore his credentials with the market, he's actually gone too far in the opposite direction. It's going to be a very tough 2 years.
Hunt said he could not avoid the painful fiscal medicine, which will not be felt immediately if Britain is to build on the recent restorations of calm in financial markets. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Back in Hong Kong, as the World Cup football's biggest tournament approaches, the Correctional Services Department said it will strengthen efforts to combat gambling in correctional institutions. During major football events, the CSD sees a rise in gambling in correctional institutions. In recent operations, CSD found some in custody were using institution-approved supplies from outside to make gambling tools. These include mosquito repellent patches and matchboxes to make mahjong and pai gao. CSD said 60 people were disciplined for participating in illegal gambling activities, with about 40% involved in gambling on football. CSD said no gambling activities will be tolerated in correctional institutions. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.